What the hell? No, 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 no!
So the Honda Grand Prix of Alabama weekend at Barber Motorsports Park turned out to be yet another completely unpredictable weekend of IndyCar racing. It started out with a street sweeper crash after one of the practice sessions. It followed through with having Firestone being forced to change their red tire compound because the tire compound that they were originally intending to use in the race was too soft and was going off way too early, making it so unpredictable for the teams to get a handle on the tire that it was going to look like the black tire was going to be the absolute fastest and longest lasting tire, which is pretty much not what Firestone or IndyCar wanted to do. We also had the story of Team Penske, which has pretty much owned the Barber Motorsports Park since its inception in 2010. They were nowhere to be found this weekend. They were found. They were mostly at the back of the time charts. But would they stay there for the race? That was one of the stories of the race. But maybe the biggest one, and certainly the one that was most influential on the outcome, was the incredible performance of Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. They swept the front row in qualifying, with Takuma Sato taking the pole position and Graham Rahal along the outside. It was the first time that team had done it since 2005, back in the IRL days, and you had to go back even further to 1998 when Brian Herta and Bobby Rahal swept a front row at a road course. So this was setting up to be just the kind of race that, we may end up talking about later in this season as just one of those ones that was truly enjoyable, even if one driver in particular really had a dominating performance. Or maybe I should say, since we had a street sweeper crash, a sweep of a performance. It didn't take long to have action in this race. Coming down for the green flag, traditionally they wait a very long time till everybody's on the main straight to throw the green flag. This was no exception. Lots of guys jumping out of line towards the back to try to not get into trouble. But one of the guys who definitely drew some trouble from race control was Ed Jones, with one of the most blatant jump starts we've seen in a very long time in pretty much any form of racing. Now, I think Ed Jones was a little bit confused here because how IndyCar racing has worked for a very long time is that you can pass before the line on every restart except for the first one. On the initial green flag, you can't improve your position until you reach the start-finish line. And of course, Ed Jones went from almost last to almost first, so you can see where IndyCar would have a bit of a problem with his handling of the start. Now, the strategy for this race was pretty cut and dry. You had the drivers on the 3-stop strategy, and you had the drivers on the 2-stop strategy. The one driver who actually really tried the 2-stop strategy that really had a legit shot of winning the race. There were a couple others like Ben Hanley and Jack Harvey, which they didn't really have the pace this weekend to really contest for the win by running a 2-stop. You had Sebastian Bourdais, Dale Coyne Racing. They always seem to have a fast car when it counts, but Dale being Dale, remember, he got Carlos Huertas a win at Houston with strategy. He always goes off strategy to try to get one of his cars in victory lane. This time was no exception. They felt like they lost that race last year at Barber on strategy, or they deserved to win it on strategy last year at Barber. They missed out on it, so they tried it again, a 2-stop strategy, when the majority of the field were running a 3-stop strategy. How would that work out for them? We'll have to see later. Rahal Letterman Lanigan was 1-2 throughout the first sequence of pit stops, but they absolutely imploded on the first pit stop. Takuma Sato struggles with the right rear tire and had an 11-second pit stop. Then Graham Rahal, much more severe problems, a stuck throttle on his car, put him at the back, though not out of the race yet. Then we head on to, again, one of the stories that kind of moved throughout the weekend. Team Penske and their struggles. Will Power losing control in the final corner and spinning out completely. Team Penske seemed to be really struggling getting a handle on tire wear throughout this entire race. That being said, and I know everybody loves me to use that phrase, they actually ended up at the end of the day with all 3 cars in the top 10. those guys at Team Penske, even when they're down, they somehow manage to come back and really put an exclamation mark on a lot of their performances. One driver in particular I'll talk about later, definitely impressive, but not really a surprise considering some of his past performances. The rookies continued to impress. Patricio O'Ward making some brilliant moves, as we've come to expect from him after just 3 races of his career. But Marcus Ericsson was the one a lot of people were talking about. He had a no holds barred style in this race, and it definitely looked like he was having fun making passes. Unfortunately for our winner last week, Colton Herta, his day would end early with fuel pressure problems taking him completely out of the race after qualifying very well and looking like he had the pace to stick around with the leaders. It looks like that team, the Harding-Steinbrenner team, is incredibly fast, but they're also fragile. This is the second mechanical failure we've seen from them this season. A fuel pressure problem isn't necessarily indicative of an engine failure, though it could be. It's one of those things that could go either way. So it could be a second failure on the engine department for Colton Herta. But regardless, again, we're seeing mechanical gremlins start to plague that team, and that's kind of unfortunate considering going into this race, Colton Herta was second in the point standings. Certainly a last place is going to hurt him immensely in terms of that. So then we had the defining moment of the race, or what maybe you would have thought would be the defining moment of the race. Graham Rahal finally had his car give up the ghost. Everybody thought there was going to be a caution thrown, and indeed there was, so there was a rush to pit. Tony Kanaan moves Max Chilton out of the way coming into the pits, and Chilton goes head-on into the tires. Insult to injury on this incident was that the pits were kept open after the caution was thrown, so there was no jumbling up of the field like we saw at Circuit of the Americas. Now, were IndyCar following their own rules here? I don't think they were. Aren't they always supposed to close the pits? Isn't that where this whole controversy from COTA started? Especially considering that a car crashed on the entrance to the pits. So you would think this would be the exact kind of situation where you would close the pits. That didn't happen. I don't have an explanation for it. Maybe they give a better one. I mean, I watched the broadcast. I didn't hear one. So that it is what it is, I guess. I guess if they want to keep the pits open, I guess put it in the rule book and start operating that way. Or maybe it's just a gentleman's agreement now between race control of the teams, or it's just IndyCar's, just saying we're just going to enforce whatever rules we want to and just wing it. I don't know. But so that means we had a restart. And was there a possibility of Takuma Sato being challenged? Scott Dixon had been so consistent sitting in second place throughout this race. He just didn't seem to have anything for Sato, but on the restart, he still didn't have anything for Sato. He was aided a little bit by Matthias Leist being a lap car in between Sato and Dixon, but once Dixon got around the lap car of Leist, Sato still was able to pull away. It looked like the battle was really going to be for second between Bourdais and Dixon, as Bourdais had been able to kind of come back up into that mix, get back on everybody else's strategy again. He was on the 2-stop, everybody else was on the 3. But Takuma Sato, as he usually does, kept it interesting for us, nearly going off the track and crashing right towards the end, I think with 5 laps to go. A piece of his car even came off the rear, but it didn't matter. Takuma Sato takes his 4th win, his 4th career win at the 4th different track. And again, it's kind of one of those classic events. He really hasn't won a race at a boring track, or at least a track that is unloved by fans. Barber Motorsports Park for Takuma Sato. And I'm always happy when Takuma Sato wins. He's a great guy. And it's nice to see not only his late career success, because there was a lot of negativity, maybe some of the younger fans don't know this, but older fans will. When he was in Formula One, he was kind of the guy that a lot of people put in the Maldonado role, the guy who always crashed all the time, wasn't consistent, wasn't ever going to be a race winner. It's nice to see him finally get the career that I think a lot of the people who supported him in the beginning thought that he was capable of. in IndyCar racing. It's also nice to see a guy who's, I think, 42 years old having such a great career. I mean, he's obviously in great shape, so if he wants to, he could probably continue for several years to come, and it looks like his best days are ahead of him rather than behind him. And then consider this. If Takuma Sato can be consistent, hey, he could be a championship contender. Let's think for a minute that maybe he gets all the way to Laguna Seca, mathematically involved in the championship fight. Guess what? Laguna Seca is an awful lot like as a track. It's an awful lot like Barber. Both Barber and Laguna Seca will be repaving next year, but the abrasive surface that we saw at Barber this weekend, we will see at Laguna Seca later in the season. Both tracks, I think, were paved around 2008, so you can imagine how much wear and tear has gone into their surfaces, and that's part of the reason why we've seen such good racing as well at tracks like Barber, and I would assume we will see it at Laguna Seca because of that track surface being so loose in terms of the grip level. Now, few people to talk about in this race. First of all, Scott Dixon. He has finished on the podium, I think, 8 times. I think this was the 8th time he's finished on the podium. Most of those have been seconds. Once again, this was a second place finish for Scott Dixon. This is one of the only tracks. He's won on like 22 different IndyCar tracks. This is one of the few he has not won on, and that streak continued today. Joseph Newgarden got a 4th position out of this race, kind of against all odds, as seeing as he was at the back. Team Penske seemed to be out to lunch the entire weekend, and you've got to think that Joseph Newgarden is starting to really look like a guy who could contend for this championship, because this was a bad day, make no doubt about it. This was a race where Team Penske was completely off their game, and yet Newgarden was able to drive. He was able to make up that distance. He was able to make up that ground. And so let's assume Penske's on their game for the rest of the season. He racks up a couple more wins. He could be the guy who's looking at a potential second championship. He didn't defend the one, but maybe he'll go get the one back. Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports gave their best performance of the season. Both James Hinchcliffe and Marcus Ericsson right together in the top 10. In fact, James Hinchcliffe was one of the faster guys throughout the weekend. He just didn't put it together in qualifying, and as we've seen, qualifying is so important in modern IndyCar racing, not because there's any kind of a huge performance gap between the cars, but for the complete opposite reason. They're so close together, a lot of times, if you can be out in front, one of the first 3 guys, you know, it's pretty hard to get around those guys because, again, the gaps are so tight. So going on to Long Beach, you have to look at a guy like Takuma Sato. I mean, we haven't seen Ray Hall really perform all that well as a team on street circuits, though Graham has always been pretty good at Long Beach. And of course, Sato has a win in 2014 with AJ Foyt Racing, so that's something that they could potentially capitalize on. That would be quite the story if suddenly Ray Hall as a team becomes a championship contender. Though Long Beach always seems to have a knack for producing new winners, or at least folks who have not won previously at Long Beach. So look at drivers like Spencer Pigot, or Colton Herta, or Felix Rosenquist, or a guy like Marcus Ericsson. You never know. The rookie class has been so strong this year. It's really up to, it's almost like you could throw just a name out randomly and have them have a really good chance of taking a win. One more thing I want to talk about real quick, because I did this so late because of the wrestling show I went to on Sunday. We know what the TV ratings were, and they aren't good. Well, we'll just put it that way. It's like a 0.2. Ooh, not good. What's weird is the contrast between what we see at the racetrack versus what we see on TV. IndyCar has been having pretty much record crowds at most of the tracks they've been going to. Specifically this year, every single one of the crowds has been up, outside of Circuit of the Americas, which didn't have something to base it off of, but apparently COTA was happy with the turnout there, so we can assume that that was a pretty good crowd. So the first 3 races of the season, either the crowd has been up or it's exceeded expectations, but on TV, first year of this exclusive NBC deal, TV ratings have either been flat or they've been down, versus kind of looking at how things have been the last couple of years. It's not good. And again, I'm going to put some of the blame here on NBC, because the decision to put the first network NBC, meaning free TV NBC race, as the Indy GP, I will always say was a mistake. It should have been St. Pete, or at the very least, it should have been something like Barber or Circuit of the Americas, or even Long Beach. Long Beach would look great on TV, and it would help with the momentum. It would have certainly helped at St. Petersburg. It would have announced to a lot of people who maybe are a little more casual and generally not as in tune to things, certainly the people who watch this show. It's frustrating. We'll hopefully, when the month of May comes around and there's a lot of NBC coverage, the TV rating, at least for the 500, maybe the Indy GP, will go up, and then the bulk of the remainder of the season, especially all the NBC races throughout the summer, will go up. But at the moment, we're starting to get to the point where I'm going to have to probably do an in-depth video, especially after the Indy 500. If the Indy 500 rating goes down, it's code brown, because, I mean, that's real bad. So, yeah, it's not good on the TV front right now for IndyCar. It seems like NBC is happy with those ratings. I don't see why they would be. Maybe it's just an outward thing, and maybe internally they're upset about it. Who knows? Anyway, let's not talk about TV ratings anymore, because it was, from a fan's perspective, again, I like Takuma Sato. He's a good guy. It's fun to see him win. And Long Beach is next week. That's always a spectacular event. It looks like they're going to have a pretty decent-sized crowd, around 70,000 people on race day for the Indy cars at there. So, let's look at the bright side for once, shall we? So, that was the Barber Race Review. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like and leave a comment, and subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content. This has been David Land on YouTube. We'll see you in the next video.